My wife, she's always thinking about my interests, and she really is a lovely person and does nice things for me. But this Christmas, a really ridiculous thing happened. She came up and we went to Sanger Harris, and she said, "Don't go with me. I want to go by myself and buy you your gift." So she went off by herself and went down to the men's furnishings there and went over where they were selling hats. And she said, "I'd like to buy my husband a hat. He's never worn a hat. I think he'd look good in a hat. I'd like to buy a hat for my husband." The man said, "Wonderful lady, what size does your husband wear?" She said, "Well, I believe it's 18 3/4. The guy said, "Well, now look, lady, I don't know your husband, but I don't think he wears 18 3/4. She said, "Well, I believe he does. I know his neck is 16 1/2, and I believe his head's bigger than his neck is." You know, I taught her how to drive up here. Yeah, I taught her how to drive. When we came here to Dallas, my wife did not know how to drive. I asked a friend, "Where should I take my wife to teach her how to drive?" He said, "Well, the best place to take her is on North Central Expressway." I said, "Man, that's ridiculous. North Central Expressway will get knocked off, we'll get bumped off." And he said, "No, you won't if you go at the right time. You've got to go at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings." I said, "How so?" He said, "Well, if you go at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings, the Jewish people, they're not out. All the Catholics, they've gotten up and gone to Mass. They're back home again. All the Baptists and the Methodists are in Sunday school, and all the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians haven't left for church yet." Sounded like a good idea until we went out there and got hit by Seventh-day Adventists going to work. The main thing, though, and this I can't fault my wife on this, friends, and especially young people, if you're not married yet, look for a woman who doesn't correct you. If you have a wife who's all the time, whatever you say, "No, it's a little bit wrong, I'm sorry, it's this way or that way," you better get out of the deal right away, because that's going to be bad news. I had a friend who has a wife just like that. Everything he says, just the opposite. He was talking to a friend the other day. He said, "Oh, I never forget back in 43 when we went out to California." His wife said, "Excuse me, honey." He said, "Don't you remember that was 46? It was after the war. We went out there in 46. You remember that, don't you?" He said, "Was it 46? Well, okay, it was 46. Anyway, never forget back in 46, we were going out to California and we were passing through Del Rio, Texas." And his wife said, "Excuse me, sweetheart, you know I hate to break in like this, but don't you remember it was in El Paso, Texas? I know what story you're telling, and it was El Paso, Texas. You remember that?" Yeah, I said, well, maybe it was El Paso, Texas. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Anyway, we were going out to California. We were going through El Paso, Texas, and we saw this little kid on the bicycle riding along the side of the road. And his wife said, "Sweetheart, I hate to break in on you like this, but don't you remember? It was not the little guy on the bicycle. It was a little girl on a pogo stick. That's what makes the story. The pogo stick. That's what makes it." He said, "I had it. I mean, up to here." So I turned to that woman. I said, "Woman, if you correct me just one more time, I'm going to double up my fist and hit you as hard as I can." I said, "Okay, maybe it was a little girl on a pogo stick. I don't know." Anyway, a little girl on the pogo stick, she was coming along just as our car pulled up to the stop, and she hit a crack in the sidewalk and went way up in the air, was falling, near the street where we were. And so the wife said, "Sweetheart, I hate to do it, but it's not quite right. Don't you remember? It was the mud puddle. That was what's so funny. She had on that fancy dress and then the pogo stick and slipped into the mud. That was what was so funny." He said, "What could I do? I had given her my word. I told her what had happened." He said, "I doubled up my fist and I hit her as hard as I could." He said, "I didn't see that woman for 5 days. For 5 days I didn't see her." He said, "Now the 6th day I could see her a little out of this eye." When I was growing up, as most of you know, my daddy was a preacher man. Of course, I was always the singer. And I had to get out front and what we called in those days, heist the tune. Anybody ever heard the music director called a tune heister? We got lots of nice fancy names for him now, like music director and coordinator of the music program and minister of music and other things that puts the titles up and the salaries down. But in those days, we were just the tune-heister. But the only disadvantage of being the tune-heister is during this long sermon, you have to sit there on the platform watching everybody, and you don't get to respond like they do, because you look out there and you notice that 3/4 of them going to sleep. Matter of fact, there's an old saying that if all the people who ever fell asleep in a church service, if they'd all been laid end to end, they'd been a lot more comfortable. I'd sit up there, my dad preaching his heart out, and I'd sit up there watching, the nodders, they'd go down, and they have the jerkers, they come back and jerk up. Then they had whole family groups that lean in together, beautiful sight. You talk about worship through quietness. Those folks, they were quiet. But anyway, as I sat there, I realized that most of the folks were tapping out anyway. It really wouldn't matter what my father said. Now, sometimes my dad had to be away. He'd go to a convention, take a vacation, whatever, and he'd always have to pay a little bit of money for somebody to come in as a supply preacher. I thought how ridiculous for them to pay a supply preacher when I could just do the job myself, maybe pick up a buck on my dad, And he said, well, Dan, if you think you could do it, I'd be glad for you to work something up. And I got to thinking to myself, what would I need to say and do to be acceptable? And then I realized it really didn't matter. Everybody was falling asleep anyway. As long as I made a general loud amount of noise and lasted about 25 minutes and got out in time for everybody to go to the cafeteria, everything's going to be all right. So I decided to write me a sermon out of Mother Goose. And then I decided, who will I pattern this after? Who will I take as my example? So I went to the very top, Dr. Crisscross, whom you know very well. And I said, here's a man who's made it to the very top. I'll just pattern my life after his. So I did. And so I bring to you tonight a sermon that I prepared, ready to go in. Oh, it's good to see you here this morning. What a joy to my heart this morning to welcome a new member of our staff. One who's come to share his heart and his life here with ours, here at this great First Baptist Church. What a joy to my heart this morning to introduce a new member of our staff, the new lifeguard for our baptistry. Speaking of our baptistry, I wonder if some of you men would come on Thursday evening and help me to clean the frogs out of the baptistry. It seems the last 3 candidates have gotten warts, and we can't have that sort of thing here at our church. Now, you won't want to forget our upcoming revival. A time of marvelous ingathering here. We'll have that marvelous evangelistic team. Double Martinez will be here. You won't want to forget our watchword, our slogan, our motto. Every fourth, bring a fifth. You'll have to forgive me this morning, folks. I got away from the office there without my notes, and I'm just having to preach out of my head. And now it's time for our morning offering. We'll all stand together. We're all standing together now. As the men come down the rows, you pass your billfold to the end of the aisle. And now, dear friends, this morning, I take my text from the 3rd chapter of Mother Goose, where it reads, Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, eating her curds and wee. Along came a spider and sat down beside her and frightened Miss Muffet away. Away, away down south in Dixie. let's look into the passage. First of all, little Miss Muffet, sad on a tuffet. Oh, dear friends, this morning, in a moment of truth, in a time when you face the inner man, when you have known yourself for what you really are, have you ever asked yourself that piercing question, what is a tuffet? This week that question came piercing to my heart. What is a tuffet? I got in my little go-kart there and rode down to the end of my library. Took down that marvelous book, The Dictionary by Webster. And it clearly states that a tuffet is the opposite of a softet. The question comes again, what is a softet? It plainly states that a softet is an unhard object, so we can clearly see that a tuffet is a hard softet. We hasten on. None too quickly, I might add. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, eating her curds and wee. Oh, dear friends, this morning, do you get the picture? Oh, do you get the picture? There on that tuffet sat that tiny little girl, hunger written all over her beautiful face. But does she satisfy that hunger with a big meal of steak and potatoes? Oh, no. Nope. She sits there hungry and forlorn, maybe even forlorn. Watch for the little ones. Sitting there eating wheat germ and yogurt. Oh, but what does the passage say she does after she eats the wheat germ and yogurt? Eating her curds and what? Wheat. Goes and carefully weighs herself to make sure she didn't gain an ounce on the curds. That's how she stays little, Miss Muffet. Oh, you read, but you don't understand. That's why you have me. Little Miss Muffet sat on the tuffet, eating her curds and wee. Along came the spider. Oh, dear friends, this morning, is this a literal spider? Does Mother Goose mean for us to take this as a literal bug? An insect? A nasty, dirty little thing crawling about? Oh, no, I think not. If Mother Goose means this, then Mother's goose is cooked. The spider here is evil. The spider is temptation. The spider is wrongdoing. It's a wolf in spider's clothing, if you please. The wolf in spider's clothing drives up in his new convertible, walks over to Muffet and says, "Hiya, Muffet. How's about going out on the town tonight?" Miss Muffet does not reply. Her heart begins to beat faster within her. She asks herself 3 important questions. First of all, spider's clothing. Sincere. Oh, sincerity. Secondly, she asked herself, is he going to sit down on the tuffet beside her? And if he does, is there enough tuffet to go around? But the third and most important question she asked herself is, what is she going to do with these stinking curds? This is no time to have curds on your head. But now we come to the moral of the story. Now we come to the ending, the finale. At last, I come to the point. What was the response of little Miss Muffet to the evil and temptation of wrongdoing? Oh, we are not so much made by that which happens to us, but how we react to that which happens to us. What did she do? What did she do? Marvelous news. Glorious news. Miss Muffet, brought up in the right kind of home. Not allowed to run around with a riffraff. Didn't even have her own tuffet till she was 18, then it was a small, modest one. What did she do? Wonderful news. This fine, fine young lady hearkened to the teachings that she had heard in her mother's goose knee. The knee of her goose mother. Or do geese even have knees? I'm not sure. But she hearkened to the teaching of her mother, and she forsook the place. Forsook it. Suck it. She forsook it. And she went home. Home on the range. Where the deer and the cantaloupes play. Now we're going to stand together for our closing. And after our closing, will you just remain standing where you are, quietly, patiently, with heads bowed and eyes closed, while our marvelous, glorious, wonderful, glorious, marvelous, wonderful, glorious, marvelous, wonderful choir sings the Messiah.